Welcome to the Climate Hive Show. What do you solve? Where we sit down with global game changers on climate. I'm Kevin Drolet, aka Kedro, and I'm here with my co-founder and co-host Mike Higgins, aka Higo. Today, we are talking about behavior change in a way that you might not expect, with implications that are pretty awesome, actually. We're going to explore the climate transition isn't just a technology issue, but a behavior, risk, and systems change. From changing how work gets done on job sites to navigating financial trade-offs, regulatory pressure, and worker well-being, this conversation will examine the often overlooked factors that determine whether climate solutions actually get adopted, which is super important. Helping us unpack these factors, along with the role of equipment rental industry's key position in the shared economy, is Bevan Hurlbert, the Senior Director of Sustainability at Sunbelt Rentals. You've probably driven by one of their stores. It's one of the nation's largest and fastest growing equipment rental companies. Bevan is going to give us insights into the flexibility of the rent instead of buy business model and the part it plays in climate transition, and why shared use and service-based approaches can reduce risk and become an on-ramp for the climate transition. Thank you for joining us, Bevan. And to kick us off, Mr. Higo, please launch this exciting conversation.
Bevan, it's so great to have you. Can't wait. Had a great time in Arizona when we met, talking around that big piece of electric equipment you had, total ball. And good to have you on the show. You know, we start with the question that's actually the name of the show, so we'll get things rolling. We'll go from there. So, Bevan, what do you solve?
Yeah, Kedro, Higo, great to be with you guys today. And it was a pleasure meeting you at Green Biz in Phoenix. I appreciate the invitation to the podcast, and I'm truly honored to be part of the conversation today. So, at a high level, I work to reduce the friction that prevents climate solutions from being adopted at scale, especially in the market and industry that I'm currently in, the rental industry. So industries like construction that partner up against our own industry. And I would say the cool thing is that within our industry, climate solutions exist, but adoption can stall often because of risk, because of cost, uncertainty, operational disruption even. And so coming into my role from really more of a pure business strategy, technology, and heavy project management background, it was a challenge to take on this sort of new to our company discipline of what we used to call ESG, and now we're calling sustainability. So that was a challenge, as well as product adoption reality that I mentioned just a moment ago. Couple that with, at the same time, our senior leadership was sort of coming into their own greater awareness of how the American rental industry, with its roots back to the 1930s, actually aligns really well today as a key cornerstone of the shared and circular economies. And so as that understanding kind of had this ripple effect outward across our company, our sustainability team has actually grown into supporting sustainable operations, social sustainability. And my role has morphed too into engaging with stakeholders, whether those are customers, internal sales and marketing teams, investors, field leadership, or executives. And so, not wanting to assume that the Climate Hive listeners are familiar with Sunbelt Rentals, I'd like to just offer a quick high-level summary of who we are. We are one of the leading equipment rental providers in North America. We have a large network of branches, north of 1,400. We have one of the most diversified fleets in the industry. We support a wide range of sectors. I mentioned construction a moment ago, but there's so many more: infrastructure, industrial manufacturing, events, utilities, emergency response, and disaster recovery. And on March 2nd, we made the jump from the UK's Financial Times Stock Exchange, the FTSE, and we're now trading on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol SUNB. So super, super excited about that. We've got 20,000 team members, Higo, that are focused on delivering what our customers need, whether it's general tool, whether it's highly specialized solutions. Those, coupled with real-time data and insights, help them plan and manage and optimize all of their projects effectively. But what's more is, our business is built on efficient sharing. So by enabling multiple customers to use the same equipment when they need it, we're extending equipment life, we're making the best possible use of the materials and the energy inputs and the embodied carbon that went into creating those pieces of equipment. So by bringing all of our product lines together, all of our business lines together, that drives efficiency, it drives flexibility for our customers, while also helping them optimize their energy pragmatism, energy use plans as it is. So it
Yeah.
helps reduce fuel consumption, uh, emissions, ultimately promotes more productive job sites. And this is what we proudly call the power of rental. And today, Sunbelt is evolving beyond equipment rental into a true solutions partner by helping customers not only get the job done, but to do it in the most safe, the smartest, the most efficient, and increasingly sustainable way.
Awesome.
Right?
That was it. I couldn't talk that long about Climate Hive if I had to. So
I don't
like,
know.
I've never been
wow.
I
accused
don't
of
know
being
about
short.
Yeah. So much to say and unpack there, man, because obviously at GreenBiz, when we met, you had a piece of construction equipment um, on the show floor that was electric, right? So it really caught my attention, right? So, how, you know, big is the electric opportunity for you guys? Because you guys have
Mhm.
huge equipment, and
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there a vision to electrify all that stuff? I mean, is there demand from that, or are you still in the process of educating, those customers when they come along that you have these alternatives and here are the reasons? How does that sort of
Yeah,
work?
no, this is a great question, Higo. I mean, yes, the here and now really sees us doing our part to provide as much training and education and hands-on, making the solutions as available as possible so that it becomes
Hmm.
an experience. I think we respond well to market demands. So whatever our customers are looking for, if they're signaling that they want more electrified fleet, then we are very responsive to that. We have great relationships with our OEMs, our original equipment manufacturers. So to take that demand, to put it back in their court to say, hey, we're being asked for more equipment like this for job sites. We
Hmm.
pass that information along all the time. Uh, and we're constantly looking at different industries that would make sense to either electrify or bring in-house as potentially new lines of business. So it's kind of the combination of both of those things again.
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see that your customers are probably looking to you guys from a regulatory framework perspective to stay educated on any of those issues that you can bring into the job site, right? Because I see that as sort of an expansion of your value proposition around let us help you think through these issues that may be impacting you in ways that you didn't know about.
No, I mean, that's very true. So I think, you're kind of maybe starting to touch a little bit on this idea of like, what are some of the challenges and headwinds that we're seeing? So,
Yeah.
that is the legislative landscape is definitely one of those places where we need to be quick to react. And the beauty of our business model is that we are able to react. We're able to help our customers react quickly, especially with the legislative whipsawing that we're seeing, at least in the United States these days.
You had like when we talked about behavior change and then sort of like teeing the conversation up, right? And like I have a neighbor that has like a mid-sized construction company that he's had for quite some time. He's a great guy, works very hard, very into gasoline, very into like,
Sure.
using fossil fuel instruments. And so I remember talking with him one time about like batteries and different alternatives and these kinds of things. And he basically was like, "Nah, my guys are gonna throw them from the truck, and they're not gonna work, and this kind of stuff, right?" And and so I'm wondering as the transition, because we can see it with cars, that, people get electric cars. There's a transition there, but within construction and construction rental, the transition from sort of what people are used to going electric or using new things. what's the behavior change that happens? How have you seen that unfold? What, kind of to Mike's point, like trying to help us understand what's the potential here? How do we change the behavior?
Yeah, that is one of the things that keeps me up at night, Kedro. I would just say that, my opinion here is that changing behavior is definitely one of the most important challenges that we face that we should address, especially when it comes to climate solution adoption. So, before we unpack that, I want to do just a really simple but impactful experiment with you guys.
Okay.
You guys game for that?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So, this is called the wristwatch. So, do you guys wear a wristwatch by any chance?
I
Yes.
do.
Okay, awesome. So this is something that the Climate Hive listeners can do as well. Again, very simple, but I think it'll provide some really good touch points along our conversation. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to take your wristwatch off, and I'd like you to put it on your other wrist. Okay,
Okay.
just leave it on there for the rest of the day. Let's just say that, right?
All
It's the
right.
weekend, so we can look forward to that. This is an anecdote that has stayed with me for, gosh, 20 plus years now. We had a visiting professor come and talk with us during my grad school program. Actually, he's an author too. His name is Chick Thompson. He took us through this behavioral change technique that really is meant to unlock creativity, but it also helps us understand the reality that it's not a lack of motivation. It's actually friction that becomes the real bottleneck to climate solutions. When a person moves their watch to the opposite wrist, the brain encounters something that's, like it's sort of like a subtle wrong sensation. The sensory friction disrupts the autopilot response that our brain is sometimes typically on. It forces us to, consciously pause, observe the change, and then deliberately rewire our physical habit loop there. So now, if you contrast that with modern climate communication, instead of asking someone to move their watch from one wrist to the other, climate action is now kind of demanding that they throw away their watch. They purchase an EV, they install heat pumps, they change their entire diet overnight. They navigate, complex local grid infrastructure and regulations simultaneously. And when the behavior and the behavioral friction is that overwhelming, our cognitive load spikes, the brain rejects change, and the status quo wins. And so I really want to just pause on this word status quo, because that's something that I think we'll continue to kind of unpack throughout the rest of our conversation. But I think there's good news and there's bad news. There's headwinds and tailwinds here, Kedra, to get back to the point about the challenge. If I'm just going to kind of frame it out, I would say that climate progress breaks down not because the technology doesn't work, but because to my earlier point, asking people to change everything all at once is a losing strategy for companies. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about climate action is that it's primarily a technology problem, where in reality, most of the solutions already exist. You guys got to see them, just a few small examples when we were in Phoenix together. It's the behavior changes that we ask to be made that are difficult when it touches things like our routine, when it touches our workflow processes, finances, compliance, risk, all at the same time.
So I have to wear my watch on my other hand the whole day. Oh, we should have talked about that in advance of me getting on
We
board
should
with
have
that
prepped for
little.
that. Yeah, my bad on not prepping you guys there.
Well, it's such a great point. I mean, I was gonna say like, have you been reading like Think Fast, Think Slow by Daniel Kahneman? Like, we
Mm.
get locked in our behaviors. I was actually just also looking Atomic Habits, is another one where it's like, how do people change? It's because at the end of the day, climate is a people question. It's about, are we going to change? Are we going to do this versus that? Mike and I had this conversation years ago about plastic bags. You go to the grocery store and then they're like, charge you 10 cents. And then people are like, nah, I don't want to pay 10 cents for a bag. And then all of a sudden they have these really nice cloth bags. And then everybody's like, oh, I got this cool cloth bag. And right, you got your, whatever's it's part of your fashion accessory item now is the bags that you're taking to the store. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
for
it's
sure, for
super,
sure.
super true. Like, so what have you learned within your particular industry on this behavior change? Like how does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to address that, Kedro, and you made me think of just a few things. Let me backstep just a second. Think about all the places that there's change that we could make. Yeah, Mike, it's Higo, it's about the watch for sure. But think about dietary shifts that we're asked to make. Consumption of meat. You know,
Yeah.
WRI has a study out that talks about how shifting to plant-rich diets is highly effective, but that faces resistance due to deeply ingrained cultural, personal habits and perceived costs. So that's really what you're getting at, Kedro, in your question. Um, I was, born and raised in the United States. I'm part of the American culture, and it's part of me for good or bad. And I love cheeseburgers, so it's very hard for me to kind of break away from uh, some of those habits. Think about transportation. So even though we know all the benefits around EVs that are there, consumers still hesitate because of upfront cost, because of range anxiety, because of relying on the existing gasoline infrastructure. Plastic use is another one. I was doing a little bit of research before our time today, and I found that there's an entity out there called the Global Center for Adaptation, and they've actually published this article that talks about, despite the fact that there is widespread knowledge of the environmental issues associated with single-use plastics, that habits around using that are so difficult to break that oftentimes interventions or even things like legislative bans have to come into play and may be necessary. But to bring it back to the question and putting it sort of in, the rental industry, if you are a construction project manager, Kedro, or you're maybe a job site foreman, you're making the decisions on how the job gets done. Your first job is not to save the planet. Your first job is to deliver that project as safely as possible, on time and under budget.
Yeah.
So climate solution adoption um, doesn't stall because people are anti-sustainability. It stalls because the change that we're asking them to make often requires too much and too fast. Um, and I think what's key here is that I would want to, highlight is when those conditions exist, we tend to lock in on the thing that we're most used to using, the easy, the familiar, and that's where it gets really difficult. So that said, and kind of continuing to respond to the question, is that this idea of equipment ownership, owning this kind of equipment, is a great example of hidden friction, and we'll continue to unpack that a little bit more. But
Mm.
I think it's true. If you buy a piece of equipment, you are now locked into that piece of equipment and that decision that you've made for years, and all the additional considerations that go along with that: training, maintenance, um, facilities, even an impact that has on your overhead. Even if something really cool comes along next year, better technology comes along, you are still now financially and operationally committed. And so I think
Yeah.
some of the question, if I reframed it now, would be, how do we help people move forward without forcing that leap of faith?
That's the try it model, right? Like that's the rent it.
Yeah,
You get a sense of,
yes.
is that what you're saying? Because like it's funny, I know somebody that were like completely against Teslas and whatever, anybody's opinion on this, it's fine. But they're like completely against Teslas. Then they went on vacation and then they rented a Tesla and then they went and bought a Tesla, because they're like, that is a fun car. You
Oh,
know?
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's lots of studies that are out there. I think there was, one that I saw a while back, maybe a little dated now, but it was exactly around that, Kendra. It was, I think Ohio State University did, kind of an analysis around Teslas and the adoption, and this idea of, putting your eyes and hands on the equipment, being able to use it, is so key in any transition, right? So, we call it rent versus own in our
Yeah.
industry, but there is a measure of, try instead of buy when it comes to climate transition. I mean, the rental model, kind of quietly functions as climate infrastructure on its own. It lowers risk. It really spreads that risk around. It lowers the friction. It maximizes equipment utilization. Uh, and rental really is essentially the sharing economy applied to industrial scale. So think about this.
Yeah.
Instead of 10 companies owning one machine that they're only going to use for maybe 5% of the time, you now have one machine that's actually doing real work across multiple jobs. And the cool thing about that is that's not just efficient. That kind of model can significantly reduce overall carbon impact when utilization increases.
Yeah. Can totally see that.
I'm thinking really too about one place that we lean on a lot is the European Rental Association, and really soon to be the American Rental Association too. There's a really strong partnership that's growing there, but they have published some research that concluded that renting equipment lowers the total carbon footprint. And of course, they estimated that depending on who's using the equipment and how it's being used, this can lead to reductions in the 30 to 50% range. So, I mean, that's significant when you think about it, especially when it comes to a hard to decarbonize industry, or the fact that we're really parallel to lots of hard to decarbonize industries.
No, I back to the Tesla thing. I use Turo now instead of the traditional rental cars. That it's a peer-to-peer car rental thing, and I've never rented a Tesla because I don't trust the refueling infrastructure. So I've got room to grow, man. Room to grow.
Well, no judgment, Higo. I mean, that range anxiety, the availability of the infrastructure. I mean, we've heard it a lot, right? This is not something new. It is something that, again, just me personally, the industries as they become more mature, really should begin to address. And I think if we don't address those things, then that's just going to continue to, kind of prevent that adoption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it'll happen. It's just you got to go first. But sometimes it works out for you. I had a different project with a $30 million a year commercial landscaping entity, and they had a problem. And the problem was there was regulations in several communities that didn't allow all that noise from blowers during the day. And so they went to electric, and it they just kept motoring. So sometimes those things come along and they can just be blessings in disguise. How are you guys seeing regulatory pressures impact decision making around electric equipment?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely this sense of policy, and really, I'm kind of thinking over the broad term, not just in today's world, but policy really isn't hypothetical anymore. I mean, it can absolutely shape real purchasing decisions, right now. I think where we've crossed kind of a threshold where regulation by itself doesn't necessarily just signal direction, it can actually set conditions around that. So if you think about there are, I think, about 20 to 30 states that are currently using green banks to provide low interest loans for clean energy projects. There's an entity called CPACE. It's the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy group. I think I did check to make sure they were still active, and especially in this fast changing world that we're in, but they're very active. They're very fast growing. They have a finance program that was developed this year in 2026 with enabling legislation in these states that allows commercial property owners to secure low-cost, long-term financing for all different kinds of energy-efficient, renewable energy and resiliency projects. even the EPA's website, and I know most of that or a lot of that has been gutted here, but there is still some places there where they consolidate information. I think it's the repowering program that they have. This is basically a repository of resources that is centralized for special solar zoning for like brownfields and landfills. And then there's also the U.S. Climate Alliance. This is a bipartisan coalition of governors. They're committed to fighting climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And their desire is to uphold the goals of the Paris Agreement. So all that said, Higo, more and more of our customers and the companies that we work with, they are really defining the requirements, and municipalities, if I didn't throw them in there too, they're really defining the requirements around emissions management. You mentioned noise reduction and safety, and those are changes that really affect the contractors. And so regulation evolves really fast. In fact, in so many cases, it evolves faster than one of our assets life cycles turn over. So back to this idea of owning locks you into yesterday's assumptions for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be your tagline. Owning locks you into yesterday's assumptions. Oh my God, that would be so good, because I also see you guys as a real solution when the ultimate customer is mandating, certain things. Like if you're, if a general contract, if a company gets a contract from a company like Meta, I'm sure they have all kinds of regulatory hurdles that they have to keep an eye on relative to energy consumption and all types of things, because those guys really have a lock on reducing emissions. They really have a lock on that, across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the bigger the customer, the more impact, the more implication that there could be with that for sure. I mean, I think what's cool about that is we're finding that this idea of renting, this idea of trying instead of buying, allows companies to experiment. It allows them to get over the fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
You talked about maybe you I'm not calling you out here, Higo. You called yourself out. So maybe the next time you go to rent or lease a vehicle, maybe you could try the Tesla and see what happens there. Maybe the watch, will kind of change that muscle memory there. But we're finding that
Yeah,
customers.
Bevan, I was going to say the
Yeah.
problem is that he has a gas-powered watch still. So
And it's
Well,
running low. We got to get it refilled.
Yes. No, we'll have to help him out, Kendra. Maybe get him an iWatch or something like that. But no, I mean, we're finding that customers, even the large customers that we were just talking about, we're finding that they don't have to just believe that the future is electrified. They can actually experience it, right? So, I mean, we can kind of come on to sort of this idea of equipment alternatives, as we're talking here. But I just want to point out the fact that that experience does something that that no white paper, no spec sheet can do. It provides just this place of replacing assumptions with real data. And I think once people, get past that, the conversation can change really quickly.
yeah, I was thinking, Bevan, take us into the construction site that's leveraging electric equipment, because you talked about sort of all the various upsides, but take us into what is that experience like? What are the
Yeah,
benefits?
yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think there's a little bit of an on-ramp here, Kedra, that kind of takes us into the job site, right? And so I know I've used this word job site a lot, and you guys stop me if I'm using jargon that doesn't quite equate. But for at least within the rental industry, a job site is essentially anywhere where our piece of equipment goes. So that could be a construction job site, that could be a brand new building that's going through LEED certification application, or maybe we're putting fencing or generators up for a like the Tortuga Live Nation Music Festival that happens in Florida every year. So when I say job sites, it's kind of broadly defined, but I've talked about this idea of how buying locks us into a particular kind of technology, but renting does let customers try this equipment on their job sites first, because all of the job sites have their own unique culture, their own requirements depending on the location. I think the working environment itself can be a really dangerous place. I mean, that just goes without saying. Job site wellness is really where sustainability stops being kind of abstract and starts being personal. Uh, Electrified equipment changes the live work experience. Higo, you mentioned it earlier, this idea of less noise, but it's also less localized exhaust, less vibration. So this kind of equipment is really fit for purpose when it comes to the workers' bodies that are actually using the equipment. And that all translates into, better air quality, hearing protection, reduced fatigue, especially when you're dealing with confined or really kind of sensitive environments. We've got really good partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, with our OEMs. JCB is one of the equipment manufacturers that we partner with quite often. They are very passionate about building equipment that's going to be fit for purpose for the job sites when it comes to reducing, noise, point of use emissions, especially in urban and indoor environments as well. Because as you guys saw, that equipment that we had at GreenBiz, that was all inside, but there was no issue with it being inside because there was no emissions coming from it.
Right.
Even California, think about the 2026 energy code that they've put out. That explicitly links emissions reduction with healthier, quieter, and safer built environments. And while we're talking about California, I'd be remiss if I don't mention U.S. Green Build, so USGBC Council, or sorry, U.S. Green Build Council, USGBC California. They now manage what's called the contractor's commitment, which essentially asks construction and contract companies to promise to advance 5 key pillars on all job sites, and job site wellness is one of those. I mean, OSHA, think about OSHA, right? They routinely report that there is documented job site hazard, and that noise is a documented job site hazard. And reducing it creates a more meaningful outcome for workers. So if we just make that connection really explicit, Kedro, to your question, people don't resist, sustainability when it improves their daily lives or their daily experience. When a climate solution makes a healthier and quieter workplace, the adoption doesn't really need policy pressure. It really spreads kind of naturally. And there's a business upside to that too. Healthier job sites tend to see, retention grow. They tend to see much better retention over a period of time. We know for a fact that safety improves when cognitive load drops. And then as a result of those two things, often productivity follows, especially in environments where noise and emissions used to slow things down.
So fascinating, all that packed into that industry. I had no idea. I mean, I'm learning all this for the first time, but it's so relevant to me. I live on the open space in my community, right? The HOA, and they come by to cut the grass over my fence, and we have low fences. And I have to get off the porch if I'm out there doing, out there with my laptop, because it's so noisy. Like the machines are so loud. You're like, it's incredible. They're out there trimming and all that stuff blowing. We don't have that noise ordinance in here because it's remarkable. And you're right. I can't think about, if you had a person doing that 8 hours a day. I mean, that is, listening to you, I'm like thinking about that. Like that's an 8 hour a day thing that someone's got that loud machine strapped to them. That's really something.
It can be significant, Higo. I haven't seen this much in the United States yet, but because some of our business is positioned over in the UK, I know that there are regulations there that require noisy equipment to have like telemetry data on it that allows for tracking the amount of decibels that the worker who has been using that equipment has experienced over X period of time. And there does come a point where they are required to stop using that equipment. They have to put it down. They have to step away. They have to give themselves a break. So, as is often the case here, especially in just sustainability at a macro level, we see the UK and Europe adopting principles, ideologies, regulations that we eventually either consider or enact here. So I would suspect that would potentially be something that would come. I would hope that it would come, especially for all of the job site workers that are, making it happen day in and day out.
That's
Do you have
interesting. Oh,
do
go
you
ahead,
have
Kev.
data? Well, do you have data on like the cost? Because I think one of your points has come up on the show a lot, right? Is like people adopt things if they're easier, better to use, regardless of whatever you should do this or shouldn't do this for the betterment of the environment. People will adopt things if their neighbor's doing it, but the most fundamental if it's saving them money or, giving them better economics. Do you have data right now from construction sites, from general contractors, from folks that you work with? We're saying, yes, this has actually saved us money that then you can turn around and leverage.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kedra. We're kind of at the beginning stages of that because there was a really good conversation I was listening to between Sully Townsend and Joel McCower at Trellis Network, and they were this is back at the beginning of the year. I think they were talking about this idea of the down wave and the up wave. One of the most recent up waves that we've seen here is kind of the outcome of the war with Iran. I'm sure the talking heads were saying if we ever go to war in Iran, there will be a direct implication on fuel pricing. So fuel pricing is absolutely a data point that we can use today, especially when we're looking at low to zero emissions equipment alternatives to say, hey, you have choices that you can make. This isn't just this is a total equipment offering that we come with, right? We let customers make the decision around whether they use a combustible engine asset or a low to zero emissions asset. And so collecting the data and working with them on the pricing, because if you consider this pricing on this kind of equipment it's higher, right? We spent more capital to procure because it's newer technology. And so, looking at all of the various different case studies that we would have with our customers to, again, get them, the equipment that they need for the job. I mean, we are in a space right now where we're working on pulling together cost data. And like I said, this fuel pricing, fuel price per gallon is absolutely a data point that we are leveraging.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if you could also get like data. I mean, that's a huge one. But just, workers, getting like into the nits and grits, like, workers are filing less claims of, injury
Hmm.
because, whatever. But I'm sure that's a longer term. Um, we're coming close to our time. We have a little time left, but I did want to ask you, Sunbelt's own approach to sustainability. And you've been in the space for a long time, so your insights are super interesting. But as a company, Sunbelt's own approach to sustainability and goals, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kedra, for bringing that back because that is such an important part of what we do whenever we engage with customers or companies that want to partner with us. We don't just, start talking about fleet. We do lean into our own journey and all of the paths that those things have taken. So within sustainability at Sunbelt, or within Sunbelt's sustainability program, we have really kind of four main pillars with that. So customer engagement, you've heard me talk a lot about that today. We invest a
Hmm.
lot in growth and development of our people, of our team members. We're connected very strongly with some signature partnerships, the Gary Sinise Foundation, Habitat for Humanity in Canada. These are places where we are walking the walk. We're talking about engaging with the community that is potentially right around that construction job site. So we are affecting people's
Right.
lives. And we have lots of really cool engagement with some of these signature partners that I mentioned. And then our operations is certainly something that we take very seriously as well. We haven't even had a chance to talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but we do track our own GHG. It's on our report, on our annual report, and on our sustainability report. Our goal is to be net zero by 2050. And we have a more immediate goal of reducing our GHG intensity 50% by the year 2034. So these are all things that we like to bring to our customers. We don't want to just assume that they know this about us, or it could be that it's a brand new customer that we're engaging with, and we like to talk about that. We bring some experience to the table, but we're very curious. We're very open to learn from them too. If I could, real quick, I know you mentioned, Kedra, we're kind of at the end of our time. So the wristwatch experiment, let me just bring that back now in light of our
God,
conversation here.
Drive me crazy.
So, I mean, the point I've been trying to make here, and hopefully this has been kind of clear, but we cannot think our way out of forming a new habit. Instead, we've got to kind of physically alter our daily routine to trigger to trigger that prompting, and to drive climate solutions. The messaging itself must be sort of subtly adjusted so that low carbon choices become the path of least resistance. I mean, if climate progress depended on only better technology, we'd be done by now, right? What really scales changes is reducing the friction, reducing behavioral and operational friction, so that sustainable choices really become the easiest ones. We know that adoption can accelerate when companies can learn, trial, reduce risk, and the rental model functions like that trialability layer, especially when it's paired with other services like data and emissions reporting. So yeah, decarbonization doesn't fail because people don't want it. Doesn't really fail at that point of invention. It succeeds or fails at the point where people and companies can decide whether the change feels safe, practical, and worth it. That's why this model really matters, not because ownership is wrong, but because learning, flexibility, and risk reduction are essential in any climate transition.
Bevan, you have given me such a completely different perspective on this issue. Phenomenal.
Awesome.
Just in terms of just how much bigger this conversation is than I had initially thought, right? Like there's so many facets to this that I wasn't contemplating. It's fascinating. I mean, it's a big message, it's a big message, and big messages take time to filter out, especially against all the touch points that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah,
but, it's a big message.
That's great to hear, Higo, and I'm happy to kind of extend our conversation whenever, if a thought comes up, or if you guys have any, follow-ons, how to get in touch with me. And yeah, glad that this has been impactful. That was my hope.
So we've had a fascinating conversation, Bevan. Just amazed at what Sunbelt Rentals is doing and the thought leadership that's behind this. There's an enormity there that you guys are bringing forward, and I think will really drive change and create that opportunity. But you said, and I thought this was so good, owning locks you into the past. And that whole idea of being locked into something is so relevant to what we talked about. And obviously Sunbelt has created a platform that can help these organizations across the spectrum move into the future in a risk-free manner. And I think that's such a profound aspect of what you guys are doing, way beyond what I've ever thought before, but now it's incredibly clear, and really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, likewise, Kedra. Thank you guys both. This has been a really good conversation, and looking forward to catching up with you guys again soon.